We've had a lot of people ask us if it's possible to follow a medical ketogenic diet while maintaining a vegetarian or a vegan diet as well. And so I'm so excited to have Hannah Warren here again with us today to talk about this topic. Hannah Warren is the Mental Health Communications and Advocacy Manager with Metabolic Mind. We've had her on the channel before to talk about her experience using the ketogenic diet as well as other metabolic therapies in the treatment of her bipolar disorder. But something that's additionally interesting about her story is that she follows a vegetarian diet as well. Actually, it's mostly vegan with the exception of consuming eggs. She actually recently wrote an article on Metabolic Mind titled, "Is Vegetarian or Vegan Ketogenic Therapy Possible?" And so I'm definitely going to link to that in the description below because it has a lot of links to really great resources and research that's being done around this. All right, so I'm so excited that we have Hannah here again on the channel, this time to talk about her experience using a vegetarian or even vegan ketogenic diet or medical keto diet. So thank you so much for joining us again today, Hannah.
Thanks so much for having me, Lauren. It's great to be back with you and just to share some information about my experience.
Yeah. So I guess to start off with, how long have you been vegan or vegetarian and why is it a choice that you made?
Yeah, so I've actually been vegetarian since I was old enough to realize that meat was an animal. I was about 3 years old when it finally clicked that when I ate meat, I was eating an animal. And it just kind of viscerally grossed me out. I was like, just really kind of personally didn't feel comfortable with the idea of eating an animal. And when I told my parents, like, I never want to eat meat again, they decided they were going to humor me. And they're like, this is probably a stage she'll grow out of. But I never did. And I still remember being so young that, like, I understood the concept that meat was an animal. I didn't even understand what foods necessarily were meat. So I'll never forget the time we were at the mall and I was really disappointed to learn that I couldn't have a corn dog because it had meat in it. I was like, oh, I was hoping that wasn't meat. But that being said, it's never really been a moral judgment, ethical judgment on others that it's wrong to eat animals. It was just this personal thing that didn't sit well with me. Like, I felt grossed out by it, and that's never gone away. But definitely think it's up to the individual. It's not like I ethically think it's superior to eat this way or anything like that.
That's so cool that it was so early on that you knew that that was one of your important values that you wanted to stick to. That's cool that you stuck to it ever since then. When did you start to follow a medical ketogenic diet? And has it always been a vegan or a vegetarian keto diet?
Yeah, so I started around the end of July in 2021 after a hospitalization. I know I talked about that in the initial interview with you. So I started ketogenic therapy at that time. And when I started, I was actually completely vegan. Becoming vegan was a choice I made later in life, just kind of, again, being a little grossed out by the factory farming industry and kind of the way animals were treated. And when I started ketogenic therapy initially, I was vegan. And at first it seemed like quite a restrictive diet, but even working in the vegan version of that diet, I was able to figure out what I could and couldn't eat and find a way to really enjoy it. But later I realized that it would probably be good for my health if I incorporated eggs. So I started to get eggs from local family farms, and those have been really satiating, become a staple in my diet, and are very nutritious. And eating eggs is something I'm very comfortable with. So that's worked out well. But it was good to have the experience eating this way as a vegan. I do know a couple people with lived experience of ketogenic therapy for mental illness who do follow a vegan diet. So I know that it's something that is possible. And really just what I like to highlight is that even if someone is vegan or vegetarian, this does not make this form of therapy off limits for them. While it may seem restrictive at first, there's plenty of ways once you dive in to make this a really satisfying way of eating so that people can have a good experience, using it as a therapy and being able to put their mental health condition into remission.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to understand is that there's a lot of different ways that you can eat medical keto. You can follow carnivore, you can follow omnivore, you can follow vegetarian or vegan, you can do Mediterranean, you can do paleo. There's a lot of different ways you can accommodate the ketogenic diet. So I guess
it's funny because it's more common, of course, for people to be on the carnivore end of that spectrum. Like a lot more people do eat meat heavy. So it's been kind of ironic for me as a lifelong vegetarian to now have so many carnivore friends as a part of the metabolic therapies community is something I didn't foresee before. But yeah, absolutely. As we both know, and you've discussed before on this channel, like when you talk to Dr. Brett Schur, keto is not a diet, it's a metabolic state. So there's so many different ways to follow ketogenic therapy, and it's not about what you eat really at all, other than you reducing carb consumption. It's just about being able to get into ketosis, right?
Right. So I guess next question would be, how do you do it? What foods are your staples, or what does your daily diet look like? And how do you ensure you're getting enough fats and even proteins without consuming meat? Like cheese and meats are a really big part of my diet in terms of getting enough fats and proteins. So on a vegan or vegetarian diet where that's maybe not accessible, how do you do that? What do you eat?
Yeah. So in terms of my protein sources, that's one of the reasons I think eating eggs is so helpful for me. That's a staple when it comes to getting enough protein. I do also eat a fair amount of tofu and tempeh as well. And I usually, when it comes to fats, I just use a lot of avocado oil, coconut oil, kind of saute and fry a lot of the foods that I eat to make sure I'm getting enough. And typically, my process for understanding this diet and being able to follow it for more than 2.5 years now has been pretty intuitive. I haven't been one of the people who's extremely meticulous about like counting my macros and doing everything that way. It's been generally just eating intuitively, knowing the foods that clearly I should avoid and cannot eat that would throw me out of ketosis. But from there, just kind of focusing on the way that I feel. And because I have high energy levels and have been able to put my mental health condition into remission, I haven't experienced any symptoms of hypomania or anything like that. It's just clearly it's working for me. That being said, even now, I'm still looking for different ways to optimize, and I'm starting to do a lot more strength training. So I probably in the coming months will be paying a little more attention to making sure that I'm getting enough protein, especially just as I'm trying to build a little more muscle. So it's something I could certainly improve on. That being said, I've been able to successfully do this therapy for my mental health condition, even without being very careful about tracking macros, and just by intuitive eating and focusing on what I know are my good protein and fat sources and incorporating them into my meals and staying away from the foods that I know I can't eat.
Right. You mentioned in your article that you do a lot of like creamy or, creams and dressings and stuff. So, what kind of stuff do you put in that, or how do you get fats out of those sources?
Yeah, so I love coconut milk, and I love making ethnic dishes. I lived in India for quite a few years, so I'll make a lot of different curries with spices and coconut milk, also Thai style curry. And I think that's one of the things that can make food really satisfying as well, is just looking at different spice profiles, like using ethnic foods and just experimenting with that a lot can I still consider myself a bit of a foodie, which may seem like a bit of a contradiction as someone who seems to have such a restrictive diet. But I think there's a lot of ways to still be creative and enjoy cooking and enjoy eating just by like focusing on the delicious ingredients that you can eat and combining them in fun, creative ways. So yeah, I definitely like to enjoy ethnic dishes and eat quite a bit of vegetables, make salads, like you said, creamy dressings, making like my homemade pesto and things like that, a dairy-free version of pesto that's quite delicious. Or tahini dressings. I use a lot of peanut butter as well. Yeah. Eat nuts, of course. Not so much that it would knock me out of ketosis, but I do eat quite a bit of nuts as well.
Yeah, good source of fat too. Mm-hmm. So, I'm interested in what you're talking about you not really taking or, finding the meticulous tracking component of all of this, of what's commonly considered following a medical diet being really a sustainable strategy for you. And I think that probably really resonates with a lot of our audience who may find that aspect a little bit difficult to adhere to, or, triggering of other issues, whether it be eating disorder behavior or whatever it may be. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit more about the approach that you have taken to ensure that you're maintaining ketosis.
Yeah, because I realize, of course, everybody's personality is different. And I've certainly met those people who really love tracking each thing and making sure that they're getting their macro ratios just right and tweaking that and being very detail oriented. I think some people like that, feels like that gives them control and helps them to kind of optimize their health. But yes, for me, it didn't feel sustainable because I tend to, have pretty busy schedule with work and things like that. And because I have a lot of rituals and routines around my metabolic therapies, a regular meditation practice and exercise, sometimes I just feel like constrained with time. And I wanted to make sure that this was something that I could start that would feel easy and just something that I could maintain. So for me, what that looked like is like looking at what is the one thing that really matters in this intervention. And that is very clear and easy to understand, that it's just ketones. That is the invaluable currency. That is what really matters when it comes to doing ketogenic therapy properly. So I'm like, I wanted to keep it simple, not to mention, when I started this, of course, there were very few resources available. Brain Energy, the book, hadn't been published yet. Metabolic Mind didn't exist. I was just kind of trying to figure out a lot through trial and error, and I knew that things like jogging and meditation really helped my state of mind and were like critical for me to just continue. I didn't understand them as a form of metabolic therapy or anything like that, but I was just like, okay, I have to balance all these things. I had started a new job, and wanted to make sure I did those routines and still made time and figured out how to do this therapy. So I just wanted to keep it simple. And I'm like, okay, all that really matters is ketones. So all I need to do is track my ketones, stay in ketosis. Without having many resources at the time, my thought was I should be in a more therapeutic level of ketosis, at like 3 millimoles and up. So that's kind of what I was striving for when I first started. And I would do that by doing quite a bit of intermittent and extended fasting kind of periodically throughout my treatment. And, so sometimes that would look like 1 meal a day or just 2 meals a day. And during that time, I knew what foods to stay away from. Obviously I'm not going to be eating potatoes or lentils or beans, the things that I was used to as kind of staples before as a vegan. I knew the things that I had to stay away from. And once I figured that out, just by cutting out those things and incorporating intermittent fasting, it was pretty easy for me to keep my ketones around that therapeutic zone that I was shooting for, maybe sometimes a little less, but generally was able to do that. And because I knew that's one of the really fulfilling things about this form of therapy and like getting a keto mojo meter. And I love that you shared with people different ways to just track your ketones because that's so critical. But it's really nice because it's very clear that you're doing it correctly. And that just reinforces your behavior change when you can see right before your eyes, okay, I'm doing it. I'm maintaining that level of ketosis. And that kind of gives you that ongoing motivation.
So how did you problem solve, or what did you do if your ketones were ever lower than you were wanting?
Yeah, and there were a few things I had to learn along the way. And the biggest thing for me was just initially I tried eating some like keto branded snacks, things like almond flour crackers or kind of keto treats and bars and stuff. And I would find a lot of the time those would kick me out of ketosis or like drastically lower my ketone levels. So I think people have to be really careful around that. And in general, I primarily stick to whole foods, real foods. I don't eat very many like packaged keto treats or anything like that because they would impact my ketones. And that was one thing. Another thing would be just occasional tendency if I ever ended up stress eating or something, like overeating foods that I could eat, especially I think nuts and berries were kind of a danger zone for me. So I have to be pretty careful about, okay, I'm going to get a little bowl of my nuts and berries and not just like keep going back to munch on those because that could throw me out of ketosis. And one way that I tracked that is obviously not at all time intensive that worked really well for me. Like I said, I'd kind of eat intuitively. So decide what I'm going to cook and make it, and then just snap a photo of my meals so that if I did ever get lower on ketones than I wanted to be, I could look back at the photos. And that's where I would distinguish, okay, I think you went a little overboard on the nuts today, or, what exactly went wrong. So that was helpful too.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool kind of intuitive, like you said, way to kind of go about it that feels maybe a little bit less cumbersome or restrictive than intensive tracking, which you're right, just doesn't resonate with a lot of people. So that's cool that you shared that. Thank you.
Oh, and you had asked
And
about just like staple foods. One thing I should share, I'm such a fan too of like zoodles and cauliflower rice and cabbage. So
yeah,
it's like such a delicious way to create a base for the meal. So just eating something like that alongside vegetables or doing stir fries with those. So it's like another really delicious thing
yeah.
that you can eat as a vegetarian or
I think when
vegan.
I started out, I was really taken aback by how much carbs add up eating like vegetables, like even cauliflower rice and, or like you said, berries and nuts and like stuff like that. But how have you found,
And see, that's what's
have
so
you been able to
interesting
eat a
because
bit
if I
more?
would have, I should very clearly say I did initially try, I thought it might be necessary to track. So in the beginning, I was trying to count grams of carbs and I was like, how am I going to do this? Because these vegetables
Yeah.
add up so quickly in terms of grams of carbs. But when I shifted my mindset and just focused on ketones and eating intuitively, I actually found I could eat a lot more vegetables than I thought I could, like if I would have gone off counting. And I'm not sure if that
Yeah.
just has to do with the amount of fiber or also perhaps the fact that we're all like metabolically different. So, what
Yeah.
works for me to get to a high level of ketosis might be different than someone else. Cause I think even you've said before that like you and Rob can eat the same foods and still have a different level of ketosis, right? So I guess
Yeah.
that's interesting as well that it's important for people to just pay attention to themselves as an individual and not necessarily always go off of a certain like grams of carbs target, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I have found that I can eat probably more vegetables and still maintain quite high levels of ketosis. Whereas if Rob were to eat the same level of vegetables, his ketones have dropped and it's a different experience. And so, yeah, perhaps what you're saying about, just focusing on maintaining your ketone levels and figuring out what exactly is necessary for that for you personally is maybe a better approach than the meticulous tracking and trying to stick to a not arbitrary, but a generalized, 20 grams net carbs a day, which may not be the right fit for everyone.
Exactly. Like, why be so rigid if perhaps everybody's metabolism is different? Find out what works for the level of ketones that you're shooting for, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess finally, do you have any advice for those who are interested in following a vegetarian or a vegan medical keto diet?
Absolutely. So, I've listened to some of your recent videos, Lauren, and I feel like we have a lot in common. And this is a lot that I've heard from other people with lived experience as well. Is that when this form of treatment works for you, it's very much a positive feedback loop because you have so much more energy. You feel so good. You are able to put symptoms that were at one time troubling and disabling into remission. It is so very motivating that the idea of making a small sacrifice, it feels to me more like an inconvenience than anything else. Like it is just so worth it that I would never even consider going, eating a different way when you look at the upside of this treatment. I think that's how a lot of people feel, especially when you've had to deal with side effects from medication, like I did with massive weight gain and brain fog and fatigue and being tired. And, when you see the upside of a treatment like this that actually repairs your metabolism and makes you physically more healthy and is so life enhancing, it's very easy to adhere to the restrictions, at least for me. So I've heard that from a lot of people. But when I do get occasionally people saying, I want to follow this treatment, but I'm struggling with the diet, for whatever reason, I think it's really important to emphasize, I think people take for granted how important positive framing is and really working on your mindset around the diet. I think that's where people struggle. Because if you feel deprived, really that's kind of a mindset that you might be reinforcing through focusing on the things that you miss. Whereas I think in general in life, it's one of these cliches, and sometimes you have to use cliches because they're just so true. But when people talk about happiness is not, getting what you want, but wanting what you have. And I think it's a cliche, but it is so profound and so true that like we have to be able to focus on those things. So for me, in terms of vegetarian, vegan, ketogenic diet, it means I'm not going to sit here and obsess over the things I can't eat, but really focus on all the amazing ingredients I have. I mean, think of all the varieties of vegetables out there. I mean, there's already just so much variety to work with in terms of spices and different ingredients. I can make so many dishes. I have so many recipes that I haven't even had time to make yet. There's plenty out there. But being able to really focus on the positives of your diet and just think about what you do find delicious and satiating, and being able to just really savor and enjoy your food. But I think also the positive reinforcement, positive framing around kind of focusing on how your food is medicinal and how it's healing and how it's helping you. That's something I also very consciously have done throughout my journey. Just not only savoring the flavors of food, but continuing to tell myself, this is good. This is transforming my life. I'm putting my illness into remission. I have the energy. I feel healthy. Being able to focus on those positives is really critical, I think.
Yeah, I think that's all really valuable for people to hear. And thank you so much for sharing. It's something that people have brought up a lot is, I'm interested in trying the medical keto diet, but I have XYZ restrictions. And a lot of people saying, I follow a vegan or a vegetarian diet. I don't think I can do this. So it's been really, really helpful hearing from you that it's absolutely possible to accommodate the medical keto diet and to meet various other, nutritional requirements or diet not restrictions. I don't like using that word, but diet differences.
Preferences. That's a good way to say it. And I should say as well that it is very completely feasible to do ketogenic therapy as a vegan or vegetarian, but people should definitely pay attention to potentially needing to supplement. Sometimes you can have deficiencies, and that is in general for a vegetarian or vegan, not just if you're following keto, but you really want to make sure that, you don't develop deficiencies in like vitamin B12 or iron or some of the other common things that vegetarians and vegans can become deficient in. So it's important to be mindful of that. And again, when we talk about metabolic differences, like we refer to maybe people getting to a different ketone level, even eating the same things. I think it's also important for me to say I have a vegetarian or a friend who was a vegetarian, and she followed ketogenic therapy for diabetes for a number of years. She's an amazing writer in the metabolic health space named Jessica Apple. And while it helped her to control her blood sugar and helped her with her diabetes, she had a lot of really severe anxiety that never really cleared until she started incorporating meat. So some people do say that they do better on meat, and that's important to acknowledge, even though that has not been my experience, just to say that everybody's different and they need to find what's healthiest for them. And I will say Jess has encouraged me many times, like, I think you'd feel even better if you incorporated a little beef tallow. And we laugh about it because it's never going to work for her to keep pressuring me. But I just think it's really important, especially in the metabolic health community. You can see a lot of divisiveness around diet, carnivore, vegetarians, like kind of duking it out over their different philosophies around food. But I think the most important thing, just like in general, is just to be inclusive and give everybody the space that they need to do what they feel is healthiest and best for them.
Yeah, and allowing space for people to figure out, you're right, what works best for them and what's best for their mind and body. I'm glad you brought up supplements, though. I forgot to ask you, because you do mention in your article on Metabolic Mind that there are some essential nutrients in animal foods that are absent or nearly absent in plant foods, or that are perhaps less bioavailable in plant foods. And so what do you supplement on a vegetarian or vegan diet?
Yeah, and I'm a little guilty of this. Only recently did I get some labs done to make sure I was optimizing and make sure I don't have any issues. And I would encourage anyone doing ketogenic therapy, we recommend some labs on the Metabolic Mind website. You can print that out and order them from that sheet. And I think everybody should, especially just starting ketogenic therapy, do those periodically throughout your treatment, because I didn't have that information when I started. I think it would have been so fascinating to be able to go back and compare my metabolic health then to where it is at now. That's very motivating. And then this can help you discover deficiencies. So recently I went in, I was a little deficient in B12 and vitamin D and carnitine. So I've started taking those supplements, and I'm going to be very mindful moving forward, because I think the better you feel, and the fact that my life, I basically have a fresh start in so many ways. And it's a continued journey of optimization. It's not like your journey really ends when you get better. It's more like now you have your life back, and let's just keep working towards optimizing health, right?
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Hannah, again, for sharing your experience of following a vegan or a vegetarian keto diet. It's been really wonderful to hear that it is absolutely possible and to hear more about the approach that you've taken in terms of adhering to a medical keto diet. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always really great to see you, and I love watching everything you're doing with this project, creating so many phenomenal resources for people. So it's really an honor to be one of your guests.
Wow, thank you. So another really big thank you to Hannah Warren for joining us today to talk about her experience using a vegetarian or vegan medical keto diet and what she's done and what that process has been like for her. Again, I will link to the article she wrote on this as well in the description below if that's something you want to check out. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.